It's Wednesday, December 7th, 2022, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues, Kathy Kiley and Ernest Perry. On our program this week, we're going to talk about ABC News benching Amy Robach and TJ Holmes after word of their relationship becomes public. CNN's cuts take down HLN and Robin Meade's morning show. And we've got some updates on a threat from Meta to pull news off of its platform if Congress passed a bill to help publishers. There's been some activity on that bill today that's really changing that up pretty quickly. So we'll talk about that as well. And some other stuff that we hope to talk about before our half hour is up. But we're going to start with the official end, we think, of the 2022 election with the election last night of Reverend Raphael Warnock in the Georgia runoff. Ernest, you said you actually caught part of it, which you haven't been watching election coverage, that horse race coverage on election night.
Watching the horse race coverage back in 2020, so it's but I did catch it last night. I just happened to be flipping channels, and I caught part of Reverend Warnock's speech, in which it sounded familiar. I mean, a familiar theme of let's sort of come together. Let's recognize that yes, this has been a tough election, but. He kept reiterating that he was the senator for all Georgians and not just those who voted for him. He also talked about working across the aisle on legislation that would be beneficial not only to people in Georgia but also beneficial to Americans. So all of the things that you heard throughout the campaign and that sort of thing. So you saw a lot of that in his speech, and I found that refreshing. I'm just wondering whether or not that's something that we're actually going to get. But I mean, it does bring up the point that with this election, the Democrats have control of the Senate in a way that they didn't have prior to his election. So now instead of the 50-50 with Vice President Harris being the deciding factor, you now have 51 and you don't have to go through that. So now you don't have the whole Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema drama that we saw in the first 2 years of the Biden presidency.
Well, I hate to disappoint you, Ernest, but as somebody who's covered the Senate and watched paint dry.
There'll be new drama.
Yes.
We'll find new drama.
No, it's not drama. It's paint drying. But the world's greatest deliberative body moves in a glacial pace. But what this will do, there will still be, I think talking about control of the Senate for people who don't kind of get their heads wrapped around the filibuster, it's kind of, they don't really have control of the Senate. Because on most issues that are of any import, you need to get 60 votes.
True.
And that means they have to compromise, which I think makes Warnock's message all the more important. The other aspect that I think is important is that single vote will give the Democrats a majority on committees. And that, I think, is really important because it helps set the legislative agenda. It allows the Democrats to set the legislative agenda. It also may enable the Democrats to respond when Republicans, who will control the House, start investigating the White House. This is a way that, it's kind of a counterweight, and I think that's why it was really important to the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I kept hearing last night and that I've been wrapping my head around is the idea that in order to get a full 6-year term, Warnock has now had to win an election in terms of number of votes 4 times.
This guy is the Iron Man.
Yeah.
He really is the Iron Man of politics. It's amazing.
Yes, and this idea of the marathon election season leads to a very, very expensive race. And there's a story in the Wall Street Journal this week, also followed up upon by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that notes that WSB TV, the big legacy TV station, has now taken it generated so much ad revenue that they have taken the crown for ad revenue generated. The station, interestingly enough, through the election season, added a 3 p.m. newscast.
Oh, yeah.
Expanded its newscast of record, the 11 p.m., by an additional 11 minutes, in part to create additional inventory for more ads.
It wasn't in part. It
was
entirely to create additional placement for ads.
Inventory for ads.
Yeah, no, the only people, certainly in Georgia, who are sorry to see this marathon end are the TV stations, because it has made them the most lucrative television stations in the country because of the advertising. And where the ad money really comes in, politicians and their official committees get a cut rate on the ads, and they get sort of pride of place. The stations have to make room for those ads. So in order to make room for other ads, they're adding local airtime, so they can build those ads in. But the interesting thing is the real money is in the outside groups, because the outside groups, the Georgians for a Better Georgia, all of these groups that are funneling money in to influence one way or the other the election.
Citizens United groups.
Exactly. They have to pay the full freight. And so that is a real, it is just a real money bonanza for the TV stations.
Yeah, it is amazing that the TV stations and others, who fall into that benefited from that, because that's not why the runoff was set up. The runoff, the system that Georgia uses, was set up as another Jim Crow legacy of trying to dilute the black vote. I mean, and it's one of those things where you got to have over 50% in the general in order to be able to win it. And if you don't get it, then you have to do this runoff, which and their hope was by having the runoff, you wouldn't have this.
Voter fatigue would set in.
Exactly. Voter fatigue would set in, which they assumed voter fatigue would be among blacks as opposed to whites. And you've had the exact opposite.
It's deliciously ironic. Yeah, I mean, the historical irony is delicious. And, the moral of the story is you can't stop change.
Yeah, yeah.
You can try, but you cannot stop it.
And ultimately, people are going to, if they see a way to vote, they're going to make it happen. I mean, the Warnock campaign had to file a lawsuit to be able to vote on Saturday after the law was passed that you wasn't able to do that. I mean, one thing after another, and I guarantee you, based on what's happened in the last 4 elections, which Senator Warnock had to battle to win, they're going to come up with something else. Something else is going to pop up in the next
barrier.
There's going to be a new barrier in the next legislative session that they're going to try to use. The only difference here is that they've got 6 years to do it. So but they'll figure out something.
Well, but 6 years for this seat.
For this seat,
that runoff
right? Exactly.
system would still exist. No.
Yes, it still exists.
In state races, say a gubernatorial race, where perhaps Stacey Abrams would be making another run.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say. Or the other outcome could be that Republicans who did nominate a black candidate this time around because they thought a black candidate would be helpful, maybe Republicans will start to think we should actually broaden our coalition instead of trying to narrow it. And maybe the message will finally get through, because there are plenty of people of color who are conservative. But
that's the conversation that's going on now, right now within the Republican Party. Is like, look, we blew it. We had a perfect opportunity in these midterms to actually not only take the Senate back, but to also take the House and do all of those things that we talked about in terms of being able to thwart Biden and the Democrats, and they completely lost it. I mean, and that hasn't happened since we're talking about going into basically, the early 1900s was the last time something like this happened. So, I mean, it's amazing, and they really have to sit down and consider, where do we go from here?
Well, and part of that, too, I would have to think is about choosing the right candidate. Herschel Walker, especially as you look at some of the things he has done and said, he was not that candidate.
Well, they
right?
let Donald Trump choose the candidate. That
But
was
he
the
kind of
problem.
sort of did. But I'm also thinking about from the
did.
standpoint of the idea of broadening the appeal. They also, let's look at Dr. Oz, who's a Muslim candidate. So attempting to diversify the membership and diversify, absolutely. But it's also got to be the right candidate who conservatives can get behind and not continuing to follow that cult of personality and that celebrity approach, because it's not going to keep working.
But the other issue...
But that means you have to welcome people in at the grassroots level.
Right.
It means you have to say, we're going to welcome you in, not because you're a celebrity, not because you're a big name, but because we value your contributions as, and then you form a bench, you develop a bench, and people come up and they have a loyalty to your party. But trying to just say, oh, we're going to get a person of color because they're a big, flashy name, and we're just going to rent them for an election season, I just don't think that builds any kind of loyalty or sincere. But no one's gonna buy that. It's so patently fake.
I agree with everything you say. From a journalist standpoint, I think it also means that when we're starting to see this, the coverage is going to change. No longer are we going to spend so much time on these fringe candidates, because ultimately in the end, when you get to the election itself, those fringe candidates just aren't they aren't winning. And so are we going to expend a whole bunch of time as journalists going down that road? I mean,
let's hope that's the lesson.
That's one thing. And the other is that you're already starting to see it. The Republicans, especially in the House, are saying we're going to start having all of these investigations, and we're going to have all these committees on issues that have already been in the news and have been covered extensively. So what new information are they going to bring up about Hunter Biden or whatever that hasn't already been done by the media? So again, the news media itself, the journalists themselves are going to have to go like, well, wait a minute. Are we going to spend a whole lot of time going over things that we've already done just because you have a committee in the House that wants to investigate it for purposes of setting up for the next election?
That means journalists have to decide whether they're going to set an agenda, which is something that feels unnatural to a lot of us,
right.
or whether you follow the agenda of the people in power.
Right.
And that, I think, is a big debate that's going on in journalism right now.
I agree.
Okay, so another topic for us to talk about. This also in Georgia, but it's because that's where CNN is headquartered. So in Atlanta, CNN is still struggling. Last week, layoffs hit hard at HLN, which you may remember stands for Headline News. Well, on Monday morning, Morning Express and its entire staff had its last show, having just all gotten the axe. Here's Robin Meade as she signed off Monday morning.
You know, I've heard that you mourn something when it passes, either because you feel guilty for leaving something unresolved, or you mourn because you truly appreciate something for what it was. The emotions this morning are of appreciation for you and for this 21-year run. You will always be my morning sunshine. Thank you.
And perhaps the first sign that HLN and that Morning Express was going to be among those to not make it past last week was Thanksgiving weekend, when they had a 4-day West Wing marathon. I think I watched more HLN in that 4 days than I have in the 21 years she was talking about. But it kind of signals that they were going to be moving away from any kind of original programming there, moving to some of these like quasi true crime stuff, relying on that even more heavily, and simulcasts from CNN, which is what you see there now in the morning.
Yeah, well, producing news is expensive. And that is why, I said to you, Ernest, earlier that we'll see how people do that, because it's easy to cover a congressional hearing. It's a lot harder to go out and produce a news story. And even producing studio news is going to come with a cost. So It's been a really tough month for journalists. There have been major cuts in newsrooms all over the country, and that is going to take a toll on the news report, a huge toll.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is a business. CNN is a business. And anyone who's in business will tell you your biggest cost is labor. Mm-hmm. And this is a clear indication that within the news business, they are cutting costs, and they're cutting costs in a way that any normal business would. You start cutting labor. And you're right. I mean, it does cost to produce the news, and that the biggest part of that cost is the people who are actually producing it.
Right. But I will add that a lot of these cuts are coming at companies that have been parts of huge mergers. And those mergers are only able to take place when people are borrowing money, and sometimes at usurious rates. Mm-hmm. So let's be clear that, yeah, it's really sad, it's a business, but some of these businesses have been run in some pretty problematic ways. And what are you doing borrowing this kind of money? Yeah. And then who suffers? It's the people who get fired, and it's the people who don't have that news anymore.
No, I'm absolutely with you on that. I mean, it is definitely, to me, the biggest issue is exactly what you're saying, is that there's been a lot of mismanagement, which leads to vulnerability on the part of these companies. And then you have others out there whose main goal is to make money, mm-hmm. who come in and either merge or either buy, and they're thinking about it in terms of how can I maximize a return on investment. They're not concerned about the legacy of that media operation or what it should be doing to further democracy, as we talk about all the time.
And they do that by reducing duplicative efforts.
Absolutely.
And if you have a morning show that you're promoting very heavily and pouring resources into on one network, you're going to simulcast it on the sister network as well. One of the things that was interesting, Brian Stelter, who lost his program and was cut at CNN, wrote what amounted to an obituary for HLN that was published in The Atlantic, and he called this the end of companion television. And I kind of saw it in a way as kind of, as you bring up job cuts as well at Gannett, and USA Today taking a very strong hit there. That idea of the consistent national, like, I can be on a business trip in Detroit, I can be at home in Columbia, Missouri, I can be in Los Angeles or Yuma or wherever I might be, turn on that TV in that hotel room, pick up that newspaper, and know exactly what I'm getting. And that idea of that companion piece is gone, that goes with you wherever.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be missed, but they'll find a way to replace it with something else. I mean, one of the things that especially in television, a lot of television news is format driven. You know the ins and outs. You know what you're going to see in the first block. You know what you're going to see toward the end. You know when weather is going to pop in. All of those things, right? That I don't think is going to change, especially at the local level. At least it's been one of the things that's been immune to all of the cuts that's taken place. The question becomes, as you start to take out the HLNs and you start to take out these other smaller companion network, what's going to take their place? And I think you're already seeing it. It's going to be a lot of simulcasts of other shows that are from other networks. You're going to see more 48 hours. You're going to see more of that type of thing going on. And then you're going to see other types of maybe entertainment programming that's disguised as news sort of pop into those spaces.
Yeah, I think all of that could be a healthy development if the alternate production, the evergreen production, let's call it, is material that's worth re-airing over and over again. I mean, that's the question. And so when you, in some ways, 24-hour news, we've talked about this on the show, has really been an unhealthy thing because it drives this sense of like, there has to be a new development. Everything's breaking news. And that's not true. And I think it really changes the national conversation in ways that haven't been healthy. So in some ways, that could be a good thing. But the question is, it would be far better if instead of firing all these people, you said, we're going to put you on a new project that's going to go out and find out what's really going on in the country, find some stories, do some agenda setting that's not set by political actors in Congress. But that's not happening.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about what's been going on at ABC News, where there's a really salacious story that has captured more headlines than maybe it should have. But there are two morning anchors on Good Morning America who are off the air. They've been benched after word of their romantic relationship became public. Amy Robach and TJ Holmes have reportedly been seeing each other for months, and they are now currently each divorcing their spouses. The gossip rags have been all over this for the last week or so, and on Monday, Kim Godwin pulled them both off of the air, saying that it's become both an internal and external distraction, and she needed some time to think through how to handle it. Now, mind you, we, the three of us, we don't know, but it appears that this is a consenting relationship between adults. But we do also know that there is a history at ABC and specifically on Good Morning America of inappropriate behavior on the part of the staff. I'm thinking of Michael Korn, who is now at Nexstar and News Nation. So did she do what she needed to do, or is this a case of the morality police overstepping?
Man, I don't know.
I know.
It just
I know. That's why I'm
be
asking you.
Every week, every month, you see something like this, and it's sort of like, is this really an external pressure